Welcome to the latest podcast in the E+T Off the Page series. The topic today is space tourism, and we're discussing if it stacks up as a sustainable and worthwhile industry for the future. I'm Tim Fryer, and I'm joined as ever by my E+T colleagues, Loughran and Tanya Weaver. And today our special guest is Dr. Simon Foster. He is Outreach Officer and Teacher at the Department of Physics with the Faculty of Natural Sciences at Imperial College London. He's also a member of the Imperial Space Lab Board. Welcome to you, Simon. I think in the context of this discussion, it's worth pointing out that the science of space has fascinated Simon since childhood, and his love of space was cemented by the inspirational Helen Sharman, Britain's first astronaut. So maybe that becomes the best place to start. Space remains the ultimate technology thrill, doesn't it? If we're looking for a poster child for inspiring children in STEM, then space exploration is the one. Would you agree, Simon?
Absolutely. I was actually in a primary school yesterday. I'm lucky enough to go in. So I went into it's World Space Week. So it's at the moment, or it was last week when this came out. But I was showing pictures of distant galaxies, actually of our own planet. So I was saying we often look out with space. Actually looking back with the hurricane at the moment, being able to track the weather and things like that. And, you know, I'm quite lucky with that because you get these children, and especially at primary age, they're all wide-eyed and stuff like that. So I feel sometimes it's like, I say it's like feeding curry to a drunk. When I'm a space scientist, it's quite easy because everyone's automatically interested in space. So for me, I'm very lucky in that. But for children, you get the amazing questions as well. So I think it's just our imagination, and that's where science I always think starts, in our imagination. So for me, hooking our imagination, especially at a young age, is vital, and space is a wonderful way of doing that.
Conversation today was going to be about space tourism. And just as a quick poll before we really get going, who thinks space tourism is a good idea? So what about Tanya? What do you think?
Well, I have quite a dim view of it. I think it's a waste of money and resources. It's terrible environmentally. It's not helping propel science, space research, and it's basically for rich people and brings no real value.
Fair enough. Jack?
No, I think I basically agree with everything Tanya just said. I guess with the caveat that if we improve rocket technology to the point where we could somehow make it carbon neutral, I don't know, maybe I would then reassess, but I mean, we're nowhere near that right now.
All right, what about you, Simon?
I'm sitting on the fence, actually. So I see the good and bad in it. I'm sure we'll go into it. But yeah, I can see both sides. And so, yeah, I kind of sometimes are very in favour, sometimes are very against. So, yeah, I'm wavering.
And I would feel much the same way, really. It does, as Tanya says, it sounds like an environmental catastrophe if it really took off. But at the same time, it's just fires the imagination of so many people.
Is like Virgin Galactic, Richard Branson's space tourism business, for those who don't know, started in 2004. And I was looking this up earlier. So far, he's flown 37 people to space, including 23 paying customers on 7 commercial flights. So that's 20 years. It's about 1.5 passengers per year thus far. I mean, he's poured billions and billions into that venture. And at the moment, I mean, the ticket, we were talking about the ticket prices earlier, actually, but I think it started at $250,000. Now it is $600,000. So, I mean, the number of people who could maybe afford a $600,000 trip to space if they sold their house is probably quite high, especially if you own property in London, for example. I mean, but the reality, the number of people with $600,000 to spare just for like a fun day out is surely so small that, I mean, I'm slightly in awe of the fact that Richard Branson even thinks Virgin Galactic could possibly be a viable business model. I mean, I'd be interested to be proved wrong on that. Is there enough people?
It's a tricky one. I think it's, for him, it's a dream that he's always wanted to do this. And so I think like a dream of many people. So I think he's living his dream to a degree. I don't really have a problem with him pumping billions into it. It's his own money. If he's going to make a loss, well, that's his thing. I think the thing of, we're probably going wildly off topic already, but the thing of, the affordability and who can do it, I think is the main thing, is just that. And I think this is where you get the different companies, but is with Virgin Galactic, I don't know if it's anything more than a very expensive funfair ride. That's the way I see. Sorry if you're listening, but if anyone's been in that, but that's the way. But I think there are, I don't know, gradations with that, and then you go to SpaceX, where I think this is where I'm kind of sitting on the fence. You're starting to blur the lines between tourism, commercialization, and science, and that's where I'm not kind of ultimately negative. Again, we're probably already going wildly off topic, and I do that, but the way that Elon Musk, and actually, Blue Origin, are able to actually have reusable rockets and stuff like that, and how he's done that, I find that unbelievable, and that should have been done a long time ago. The thing of just letting it fall into the sea and going up and picking up bits of it is just bonkers. And so that's kind of where I'm sitting on the fence. But whether that comes under tourism is another factor.
Does it? These SpaceX has been used to transport people to International Space Station, isn't it? So is it using the same journey as taken to get to the ISS, or is it it's not actually doing any research? It's not doing any space exploration in its own right, is it?
But the point, I suppose, is that these billionaires have charged such a huge premium that potentially that money is then ploughed back into SpaceX, who can then improve their rockets and make them more sustainable and improve the technology and so on.
Sometimes if you're going to pump your own money in it, you will look from it from a different angle. Does that make sense? A traditional view, and this is, I did astronautics, was you built a rocket. It was 3 stages or 4 stages, however many, and bits of it fell off. Does that make sense? On the way into space. It might fall in the Pacific, the Atlantic, wherever. You went and picked it up. He's actually taken a different view. And it was costly in the first point because they all blew up and everyone was laughing. But actually now you've got reusable rockets and come back. And actually his kind of argument, which was perfect, was it was the same. It was like building a jumbo jet that only flew once, and then you flew from London to Australia. It crashed. Everyone got out safely, and you just said, "Well, that's a write-off. Let's build another one to come back." So I think I do appreciate that commercially, people are willing to take more risks and look at a different view, and non-traditional views. That's where I sit on the fence because I think, I'm not a fanboy of Elon Musk, but I think where he's done that is amazing. But the ultimate aim is, obviously, he wants to send people to pay to go into space. And a lot of it was that actually the people that have gone to the ISS, governments have paid it, so NASA and stuff. Now, this is where you're blurring the line. Are they tourists? If they're conducting scientific research. This is where the grey area starts to appear for me.
In terms of sort of the environmental impact, so SpaceX has reusable rockets, which means you're now immediately cutting quite a lot of carbon just from the manufacture and creation of those rockets. But I suppose what you're not cutting is the fuel, which, it's still the same amount of fuel presumably as it was in the 60s in the Apollo.
Punching through the atmosphere and dumping stuff straight higher in the atmosphere and stuff like that, and you're doing it more regularly. So there is, but he's done that for a very smart reason. Okay. He's done that, I'm sure, to go to Mars. And the reason being, a colleague of mine, I should say, actually pointed this out to me, because I thought we would be using water. You would electrolyse the water on Mars into hydrogen and oxygen. That's the traditional fuel we use on Earth. And he said, no, actually on Mars, what you would do is you'd take the CO2 that's there, mix it with the hydrogen, and you would make methane. And that's actually got more thrust.
Oh, right.
And I'm sure that is why Elon Musk's, the Raptor engines use methane. Because he's actually thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead that he's going to use these going to Mars. As I say, I'm not a fanboy, but I can sketch out, I think, where he's going, and I think he's done a lot of smart moves. So I kind of sit, and obviously being a space person, coming from that background, I can't get over the natural love that the hook's already in me that I've bought in already. So this is why I kind of sit on the fence with it.
In terms of hydrogen used as a rocket propellant, that's basically the kind of one potentially carbon neutral fuel that you could use for that. At the moment, vast majority of hydrogen is actually made from fossil fuels and is actually highly carbon intensive. But in theory, if you've got a mass electrolysis technology that's all powered using renewable energy, in theory, you can make hydrogen completely carbon neutrally. So, do you have a view on the reality of that? Could hydrogen become the dominant fuel?
when I teach this to children, I always say that technically it is because, all right, there's solid rocket boosters as well that actually are terrible, that have got aluminium and ammonia perchlorate and God knows what in it, which is awful environmentally. But yeah, you get that and you just I kind of take a shortcut and say we just, we burn hydrogen and oxygen, we get water out, isn't that wonderful? And we can electrolyse. Yeah, so that is one way of making it a lot more environmentally friendly.
But hydrogen takes up a lot of space. When we've started trying to look at it for use on ferries and things like that, it's not very space efficient. So if you're trying to have enough hydrogen to fuel a rocket, that presumably, particularly if it's going to Mars, then that's going to change the geometry of a spaceship considerably.
There is an environmental kind of payoff in that, yes, it's not that polluting. Now, how you derive it, yes, is, but where you're dumping your gases, does that make sense, on the way into space, isn't that, it's hard where you're putting the pollution. There was a rocket, I remember doing, God, this is 20 years ago when I did astronautics, but I remember the Russian fuel produced nitric acid as one of its, the Soviet fuel, I should say. So you got that, and I'm sure it was pumping out nitric acid out the back. Now, that was really powerful fuel, but obviously you've got a kind of balance of environmental. Does that make sense? Now, the Soviets had a slightly different view on, they were blasting these things off, and acid pumping out the back they didn't really care about that. They had a bigger punch.
And all this space junk that's now orbiting.
Weirdly, I don't think it's that much. It's hard to say that. It's not that, because we can use hydrogen and oxygen. You just get around it, or methane. And yeah, actually, I think aluminium oxide is the big one, and on solid fuels.
What's the consequences of that? What's its damage?
Well, actually, it can cause weirdly dimming, I think, and it can, clouds and stuff like that. And so really, you don't really want, as far as I'm concerned, the only thing I want in the atmosphere is nitrogen, oxygen, argon, and a bit of carbon dioxide. I don't want vast amounts of aluminium oxide. So you could have atmospheric effect, it could have health impacts. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so what? That's within the atmosphere. But what about if there was separate propulsion methods? Once you get clear of the atmosphere, does it matter if we have nitric acid being pumped into space? And that ties in with what's our responsibility to the environment of space, and will space tourism potentially have consequences?
I was actually saying this to some students where I work, Imperial, is that actually, we're looking at plastic pollution in the oceans, and we've got a lot of work going on about that, and that's really, and a lot of my colleagues work on that, and pollution of the seas. Actually, we kind of see space as just this endless, infinite kind of ocean, and it goes on forever, and what we dump up there doesn't really matter. But actually, around us, it's actually getting clogged up. I see it as akin to plastic pollution. So we're going to have to blast through that. And the difference with plastic pollution is that it's not travelling at hundreds, or thousands or tens of thousands of kilometres per second that's going to rip through something if you hit it. And that is the big problem. And I think with all nations have been no kind of coming together under that, because actually I think under the way any rocket's launched it's kind of the nation's own issue. There's not much intercollaboration. And I know in London now we have the International Centre for Space Law. And I think that space law is going to become a very big thing because of this in the future. Actually, who's responsible for cleaning this stuff up?
Well, with space debris, I remember seeing a picture of like a titanium hull. I think it was on the ISS. And it was literally hit by a small, tiny chip of paint. It was like a millimetre in size or something. And it was like a huge impact on this incredibly strong metal hull.
I was just going to say, I've written something on our news pages recently about nations coming together about space junk. I'm sure there's been something that's going on, that they're working on it. And NASA's also launching things at the moment, which is what can decommission.
Been talk of like nets and stuff like that. But then the issue is, where do these private companies fall? Do they fall under the auspices? Will NASA negotiate on their behalf, and they would then say, right, whatever NASA said, if I'm America, if I'm Blue Origin, if I'm SpaceX, right, NASA negotiates on my behalf, and whatever they come back with, I will kind of fall under? Or will they, will we have to have a separate? I think that's where, will they abide by these treaties? it's a grey area because space, again, is you can just do whatever you want up there.
There's Chinese, Indian, Australian, all sorts of countries that get involved in space exploration at the moment, irrespective of the tourism. They don't necessarily need to comply with what a London law-based space centre has got to say, do they?
How do you stop someone launching a rocket? What will be the repercussions? And there is that. And we're launching them as well. We've got loads of spaceports in the UK now. We've got the one in Cornwall. We've got, we're commercially going up there, which I think is fantastic. But there has to be a framework. I think we're going to have to look at that.
I mean, on that point, do you think the UK has the future of sort of a space tourism hub of Europe?
Don't know if we've got it in terms of space tourism. I certainly think in terms of launching satellites and payloads and scientific things. Definitely. In terms of human spaceflight, you always want to try and launch from the equator. So when you take off, because the Earth is spinning faster at the equator, you get a bigger kick. So I think with Virgin, all these always got to look for the cheapest option, which I don't blame them. So that's going to be trying to launch from the southern United States. So I don't think we've got that. Where we do have, I think, is actually, and we are brilliant in the UK, we are technologically, in terms of space science, fantastic. We are one of the best countries for it. I will always say that our universities, companies we've got here are fantastic. So we can certainly feed into space tourism in terms of the materials, in terms of rockets, in terms of everything like that. Definitely. I don't know if we would ever become a spaceport in terms of rocking up, getting on whatever and flying. But I think we will feed into it, definitely.
So I was reading that last month, billionaire businessman Jared Isaacman, I'm not sure what business he's involved in, but he undertook the first privately funded spacewalk from a SpaceX Dragon capsule. I just wondered, do you think we'll be seeing more of that? Because, could we end up in a situation where you've got like multi-millionaires who've like gone on Virgin Galactic and then billionaires are coming? It's like, you had 3 minutes of 0G. Wow. I went to the ISS and did a spacewalk.
This is again where I'm in my grey area, because actually if someone wants to conduct scientific experiments in space and they want to put their own money into it, I don't really see the problem, because again, I don't think the government should necessarily be a barrier, because at the moment, if we want to do anything in space, everything's got to go to a degree through the government. And this is why I see it's huge advancements for human beings in space. If you can do something up there and you want to pump your own money into it, fine. If you want to conduct some experiment that you think is going to lead to something better on it, I don't have a problem. The weird thing about that spacewalk is I tuned in for it and I can't believe how little impact in the media it had. I was tuned into it and it did take a long time. And these things in space do. It wasn't instant. You open the hatch and you jump out. But I was watching it, I was at work, but I was watching it, I had it on in the background. But I was shocked how little impact, how few ripples it had in the kind of space ecosystem back here on Earth. And I was really surprised by that.
And did he do any science while he was up there then? Or was it just all about him having a spacewalk?
I think it was all about him having a space, but I would be generous in saying obviously they're always the firsts. It was to check that obviously the decompression of the space capsule, they decompressed fully the space capsule, was it, and what it will lead to. So obviously someone has to do that, be the first to do that. So I would still say that that's science. I know that sounds, he may not have, seen how a poppy seed grew in space or anything like that, or, a water bear. But you have to do those first steps. But as I say, I was just really surprised that everyone wasn't raving about it.
We had a bit of a chat about this before we started, but you did say that space tourism isn't doing much for your sort of industry, like.
I speak to children a lot, and adults, young adults, and everyone really. And you say and there is a difference in that. I think a lot of people my age and over, so 40 and over, still have the dream of being an astronaut. That's not going to come true for me, and I think it is a dream, and which is why I think has led to space tourism. But I think younger people are actually getting a more and more negative view, because actually anyone can go into space now. It's not for, we were always fed this, and I believe it's still for the good of humanity, and you still got like Jack Kennedy's speeches ringing in our ears of all that. And I think I wasn't alive then, but, I've listened to back to them.
Because it is hard.
Yeah, and it's utterly inspirational. It makes you want to, one of them things where it makes you want to do it. It costs a lot of money and you're going to do that. But now we're seeing, if you're just a billionaire, you can go and be an astronaut and you can get your astronaut wings. Well, what's really special about that? Who are you doing that for? Are you doing it for the good of humanity or are you doing it for the good of you? And I've seen that amongst children, really, that there is a tail off. Now, space itself is still inspirational and people still want to work in space. The biggest career, I do a lot of careers. Weirdly, the biggest career that all children want to work in is space law. 2 reasons. 1, because they love space. 2, law is seen as a way of making a lot of money. So if you can do both, does that make sense? Yeah. Fantastic. And weirdly, I've got this whole careers thing. It's called I'm a Space Person. It's spaceperson.co.uk. All the careers in space. And one of them is about flights. There's a lot of space tourism in there.
What is space law? Totally way off topic. But
I suppose, part of me, the way I say it to children is like to say 2 things, but satellites bumping. It's like cars bumping each other. Who's to blame? Does that make sense? You've got a bit of debris fallen off of your rocket, smashed through my satellite. Now, was that negligible? Was it a negligence or was that unforeseen? There's going to be a lot more of that. It's going to become a big thing.
So, I mean, at the moment, I did talk about Virgin and Galactic earlier and how it was, 250 grand 10, 15 years ago when people were first putting their sort of initial bookings in, and now it's risen up to 600. So, I mean, the trajectory we're on at the moment is that space tourism is actually getting less accessible because more people can afford 250 grand than 600. So do you think technology, is there a kind of progression that you could actually see that figure coming down and even coming down to levels where people that aren't kind of on astronomically high salaries can actually afford to do it?
I definitely could see that in the future. Yeah, it would be in the tens of thousands and I could see that. But weirdly, at the same time, sorry, again, I shouldn't be so negative about it. My view is it would then get to the point of being like an EasyJet flight. And would it be more, like, how pleasant would it be? You look at the 20s and the 30s, going on a plane, oh my Lord, that was unbelievable. Now it's like, I've got to go away and it's like, do I really want to, I'm going to be crushed in. I've got to go economy. Can I have premium? I'm 6'2". Can I have a little bit of extra space to say? And will it be like that will you have easy space? And, you're sitting there in a fetal position and then you get 30 seconds of space in 0G.
But that would be decades away at least.
Yes, yeah. But I could see it coming. It would happen because it's got to be like anything. It will get cheaper. I'm sure it will.
You're saying this dip into space, the Virgin Galactic model, they're only an hour and a half or 2 hours or something. These are the total trips, aren't they? Just up and down. Jack says 3 minutes of weightlessness or something like that. That's really devaluing space to a certain extent, or the allure within children of a career in space. But maybe there is a lot happening on the moon again these days, and interest shown in Mars. Could that reignite that interest, do you think?
I'm hoping it will. There's the project, I think it's called Lunar Gateway, we're going to put into orbit. And then that will be like a shuttle service, weirdly, down to the moon, back and forth. So you fly to the space station around the moon and you go down. Now, it won't be long, I'm sure, before you're going to see someone paying $50, $100 million to be the first commercial. And I'm sure, and I work with people, that there will be the commercialization of the moon because there are a lot of minerals up there. Especially maybe with nuclear fusion, there's a possibility. So who's going to pay for that? This is where I don't really mind private companies being involved and taking the risk. Like if you want to go and do something wacky like building a moon base that you collect the regolith, it's going to cost you $100 billion. All right, well, fine. So I don't know if I'm going wildly off topic now. But we've seen it with the Apollo missions by Apollo 12. So you had Apollo 11, everyone went crazy for it. Apollo 12, no one was interested. By Apollo 13, the only thing that got Apollo 13 interested was because there was a near disaster.
So does that mean that we need to go to Mars to really get the topic going again?
I think what we need to do is, to really get the topic is actually say what the worth is to us.
Well, that is a whole different conversation, isn't it? Is why are we investing so much money in space at all, irrespective of the space tourism? There's clearly advantages in terms of satellites, communications, knowing where we are in the world, studying the weather and all that sort of thing. Wasn't some of your original work studying sunspots on the sun? And that obviously has effects on Earth, and that makes sense. But all this exploration of the outer reaches of the solar system and beyond, does that really have a value at all?
This is where I'm going to get again, Jack Kennedy's style, but I think it has a value to us as humanity because we just have this need, I think, to keep pushing and to keep going. I weirdly think that there is this value in it in terms of our humanity to keep exploring and keep going and pushing the boundaries. Big question I always get is about alien life. Now, that to me is the ultimate question. And can we push? Now we're going to Jupiter to look for signs of it. Could we keep pushing for that? For me, the thing is, the first one is when we go to another star system, which I'm sure human beings will do. I'm sure we will. But how we will do that, I don't know. But we have to push ourselves. I feel we have to push ourselves like that. Otherwise, I fear, and again, I'll probably sound all Elon Musk here, we will stagnate as a species if we do not push ourselves. And going into space and beyond is one way we can continue to push ourselves forward.
We haven't studied the oceans, what's underneath there. 80% of the ocean floor is undiscovered, and we've got so many problems on the planet that can be solved by engineering and technology. We're not short of challenges at the moment. Why go into this incredibly expensive one that it's difficult to actually see what's going to be the ultimate goal? We can never get to that stage, surely. As far as physics as we understand it at the moment, we're stuck to our own solar system.
I think as soon as you start limiting yourself, you are limited to that. I think we need to set our limits on the first one. I actually think Mars, great. I do think our target should be the nearest star system. And I think as soon as you say, no, we're never going to do that. And I see this as long term. We're talking hundreds and thousands of years. Where are we going as a species? Weirdly, and if we limit ourselves to Earth, that worries me. So I actually think saying that, why can't we limit these other things? Then you invent the technology to do that. So if you say we have to do this, technology comes with it. I'm sure we will send a satellite to our nearest star system within 50 years. There's a whole laser. Have you heard about that with the solar sails, stuff like that? And and I'm sure you could do that, and we would send in beam pictures back. As physics as we know it now, there's always ways that you can push it. Now, again, this is why I think linking back to space tourism, stuff like that, it is private companies that will take those leaps because you will get people like Elon Musk that are willing to pump money into a loony kind of, this is never going to happen type scenario. But we'll try.
But couldn't you argue that, as you're saying, if we ever do make it to another star system, it will be hundreds, if not thousands of years. And at the rate we're going, humanity might not last for hundreds of thousands of years. Yeah. So maybe we should focus on the problems at home so that we can at least get to that point before.
There is that. But I think actually I would always hope that by pushing ourselves out there would be the inspiration for us not to destroy ourselves. I know that we need an aim as a species, as a people, and coming together with a grand aim, with a grand plan. So I sound like a Bond villain, but I sound like Drax from Moonraker, but going out there with a grand plan as a species, as working together, I actually think this is what worries me of limiting ourselves to this planet, is that we will fight over everything here. Now, all right, we might fight over Mars and stuff like that, I don't know. But I do think we just have this in us to constantly be going. And I know we haven't searched the oceans. Weirdly, I always think space is easier. From a logical point of view, weirdly, I think, the pressure's down there. Weirdly, the pressure difference and getting up to space is possibly easier. So I do take that on board. But I just think and that's where I'm on this grey area, that Elon Musk will, and all these people, have the billions. And if they want to do it, I'm all for that. And they will employ scientists. And I'm a scientist, so they're brilliant. They'll employ people like me. And it's their own money, and I have no problem with that. Now, it's is it a joyride or is it the benefit? Is where I'm kind of lost.
You mentioned Mars there. As I understand it, with our current technology, it would take about 9 months to get there. 9 months back, and you've got to wait for 3 months while you're up there for Mars and the Earth to be close enough. So you're talking about a 21-month round trip if you're going to go on a holiday to Mars. Is that going to be realistic? Is that going to be attractive to people? Is it realistic?
And just to add to that, presumably if people are going to be there for 21 months, you'll need doctors, you'll need other things there. And how's that going to...
Personally think if you go there, it's going to be years you will be there. And I think there's for a couple of reasons. One, if you go all that journey, it's like going to Australia for a business meeting and coming back. You know, you're there for 2 hours and you come back. There's no point flying for 12 hours. There's several reasons. The other reason is I think we don't know what's their microbial. And this is one of my big arguments. And a colleague of mine works on malaria and she said it can live in you for 18 months, malaria, before it comes out. Longer, possibly. Now, we've got to make sure that those people going there, does that make sense? Don't pick up something. So I actually think Mars itself will become a quarantine, as will the journey. When human beings, the Apollo astronauts landed on the moon, both Apollo astronauts and Russian cosmonauts went to their respective space stations and said, right, we've got to go to Mars. And the argument is, well, we can't get you back. The astronauts in both America and the Soviet Union came up with the same plan of just send me there, land me there, and keep sending books and food and work out a plan to bring me back. The Americans dubbed it the fat slobber mission, that you just sit me there, and if I'm there for 10 years, I'll do it, but I want to be the first person to land on Mars. And I think people will always pay that price, will always do the 9 months. The big problem is, as we've seen with Aurora, space weather is your biggest problem. Getting hit with a coronal mass ejection like a solar flare is probably getting there is actually the big problem. But I think tourists will definitely do it. And I could see it being a tourist venture, something like Elon Musk, as I say, with his Raptor rockets, being the first one that tries it. I genuinely think, and you would have no shortage of volunteers. If he said today, I'm going to Mars 2030, who wants to do it? You would have people queuing around the block to give him 100 million to do it, without a doubt.
The excitement for space is still there.
But I would say it's amongst the older generations, you could say, that are still inspired by those Apollo missions and by the early, space stations and stuff like that. And they're unfortunately probably the ones with the 100 million that could do the trip to Mars. So whether or not you would see that, but obviously being the first, this is my inspiration to kids. I always say this yesterday, I could be talking to the first human being to land on Mars. It could be one of you. And so there's always that thing to be the first person. You're in the history books. Everyone knows Neil Armstrong. Forever, for eternity, that's going to be.
In terms of Mars, we have been talking about going to Mars for quite a long time, and there are programs undergoing at NASA and places like that. Do we have the technology to go to Mars right now? And if we do, why haven't we done it yet?
Yes, we probably do. I'm sure, as I say, the methane burning the rockets is for Mars. Why we haven't been there yet, I think it's genuinely because of the dangers of the journey. So the space weather issue we have not got over yet. We're very fortunate, and as is me, for a solar physicist, it's fantastic. You can see the aurora. That is going to blast you going to Mars. Now, that is the real issue of how your astronauts don't die on the journey. I was told that someone I know, they were told by the engineers working on it, well, of course, you're going to have some collateral damage. And all the astronauts in the room went, by collateral damage, do you mean us? And then the engineers went, well, yeah. Well, we could have gone a long time ago, and we could go pretty much tomorrow. It's the big issue of keeping, as you say, a 9-month journey when you're getting blasted with radiation is not a good one. And what signal would that send back? I still think people would say, I will take the risk.
I mean, isn't it fair to say that some of the early Apollo missions, I'm sure Neil Armstrong was told, yeah, you'll probably make it back. Yeah, should be fine. Should be. And it was fine.
Yeah.
Was there maybe more a culture of risk taking back in the early days of space, and now there's more concern over the safety of astronauts?
There is. But I think the context in which that was done, I think the astronauts were almost like soldiers. And they were all from, test pilots. So they were all test pilots, or most of them, apart from Neil Armstrong, I think he was a geologist. They were all test pilots in the Air Force. So they had a certain degree of risk taking. So it was built in. Secondly, it was effectively a front on the Cold War. So they were soldiers. Almost you could see it as a combatants. Now, are we willing to take the same risks? No, because what is the combat? Who are we fighting in science? I still think that one day, sorry, again, we're going wildly off topic, that we will wake up one day and China will be on the way to the moon. You wake up one day, because they've put, what's it, Tiangong, it's the Heavenly Palace, you know, and it just appeared one day. You know, they just put a space station.
ISS,
They just put it up one day and it's like, wow. So I still think there is that, but it isn't as much as a push. Whereas commercialisation, actually, you have got it between Blue Origin. You've got a Cold War there between these different companies. So, yeah, you've got different scenarios playing out.
We have actually come back to space tourism there. I'll latch on that. And the Russians sent the first rocket up, the first astronaut up in 1961, I think it was. And that kind of spoiled another aspect of space tourism, if you like, or space exploration. And that was that people used to go up in balloons before that. Back as 1931, people went up to the edge of the atmosphere. And that is another option today. So when we're talking about space tourism, we're talking about the glamour of rockets. But there's a couple of companies, Halo and Space Perspectives, I think they're called, who are readying themselves for a different sort of space tourism, which will cost a third as much as going up in a rocket. And also you can go up without massive G-forces. You don't need to be as fit, I guess. What do we think about other sorts of space tourism? It doesn't need to be in a carbon-emitting rocket.
I suppose it's what do you want from it? Do you want the zero G? Because there was a guy, you know, Felix Baumgartner went up, he parachuted the edge of space. This guy did it in the 60s called Joe Kittinger, who was testing out flight suits and did a thing. He went up and he parachuted back down. And his thing was that you see the footage, you can see the curvature of the Earth, you can see the atmosphere, and very thin atmosphere. So if you want, I suppose it's what do you want to get out of it? Do you want that shot of looking down on Earth and seeing it in space, which you probably will get, or do you want the zero G, which you won't? And I suppose you're then starting to you're getting a menu of options.
Well, I think you can, or microgravity, if not total zero. But I think the way that they descend, yes, if it's free falling and you
will have it,
you do have those moments of microgravity. But I don't know if that is the same.
Yeah, there is. I think I'm sure they all do it. It's how you test your pilots in zero. Stephen Hawking even did it, so you would be able, was able to do it in his frail shape. So there are different options out there.
It's fascinating to see how it's going to unfold. That's us out of time.
Simon, could I just ask, where can listeners find you?
I'm on X or Twitter at Dr. Fozzie. Yeah, I'm terrible in my social media presence. I should say I'm terrible with that.
Great words of wisdom from you, Simon. Really appreciated that. It was fascinating. A reminder that we're now building up quite a collection of these podcasts, all of which are available through our website, entmagazine.com, but also on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from normally.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.